Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. Our guest this week is Simon Bowen, the founder of the Models Method and the creator of the Genius Model. Simon is one of the most interesting people I've come across in a while. He's an advisor to executives from companies across the globe, political leaders, military leaders, and a really deep thinker. I had the pleasure to appear on Simon's podcast, The Wisdom of, just recently, and it was one of the best conversations I've had on a show. And I'm excited to have Simon here on our show. So, Simon, welcome.
Well, thanks very much for having me back,
Yeah.
returning.
This is our second conversation in about a month, and now the tables are turned, and I'm looking forward to kind of unpacking your story.
Sure.
I think a good place maybe to start is just give the audience a sense of what it is you do every day, because not many people have a business like yours, and so I feel like this will be fertile ground for us to explore. You know, how you became who you became.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in small country towns in Western Australia, and when I say small, I mean 400 people and 900 people. And if you're going somewhere, whether that's on your push bike or eventually in a car when you've got your driver's license or something, one of your uncles or your father or someone would grab a stick and draw a map in the ground in the dirt and say, "Well, here's how you get there." And then they'd kick it with their foot and it would go away. Right? So you had to remember it all in your head. And then I started my life in electrics and electronics, and to design a circuit or to diagnose a circuit, the first thing you get is a circuit diagram on paper, right? And I just realized that between concept and reality is almost always a drawing in between, whether it's a map drawn in the dirt on the ground or a circuit diagram. Everything that you and I are using, Nick, the computers, the screens and everything, they were a thought in somebody's head, and then they became reality only after they entered the world as a drawing, a visual representation. And so the metaphysics of anything in reality that humans have made is that it's usually a design drawing of some form. You would never go to an architect and say, "I've got an idea for a house, can you build it for me?" You would actually say to the architect, "Do some drawings for me." And I just realized, both in my technical career and then in my senior executive career with one of Australia's largest companies, then as a consultant, we document everything. We document procedures and organizational structures and workflows and everything else, but we don't document the genius that a company is built upon. No one documented Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak's genius, but they drew the schematics for the computers, right? But we don't document the genius of the founder and then the collective genius that comes from that. And so I became fascinated with this idea of company genius. And so what we do today is we create powerful visual models, Venn diagrams, 2x2 matrices, triangles, squares, circles. We create powerful visual models that capture and codify deep thinking. And the first thing they do is they act as a system for thinking. And when you've got to populate a design framework on paper with your thinking, it stretches the depth of thinking. And then that model that you've created becomes an automatic tool for influence that you use to get other people to make decisions to support you, whether that's customers to buy from you, staff to work for you, whatever. So, I work with CEOs who say, "I've got to talk to my entire workforce about an issue. Help me frame that in a visual model so that it lands." Our primary business is capturing and codifying the core genius of an entire company in a single visual model, so you can explain it in about 7 minutes. And when someone goes, "Well, that company has genius capability," almost anything they create and sell would be great, fantastic. When we're doing values work, we build a model for values, not just words on the wall kind of thing. And so we're in this business of capturing complex thinking into powerful visual models that just land with an audience, but stretch the thinking of the people that are doing that thinking in the first place. So that takes us into companies all around the world. Our system's in use in about 30 different countries and in every industry sector you could possibly think of. And it's powerful. If you don't mind me just drawing really briefly,
Please do.
there's two things that might be useful for people to think about. Humans have an intensity about them. high and low. And then we apply time and effort to try and convince people of something that we want them to buy into. And so humans have a high intensity for resistance. So we have a high intensity for saying no. It's how we keep ourselves safe in the world. But we have a low intensity for acceptance. We don't have an automatic system for saying yes. And so when we're trying to convince somebody of something, conversion to an idea is what happens when these two curves reverse. That's the moment of conversion, when my resistance and my acceptance flip over. And now I accept your idea and all resistance melts away. But in order to make this happen sooner, we apply pressure, and we call it selling. And of course, if you put pressure inside a cylinder, you just push the sides further apart. And what we want to be doing is getting people to an outcome as soon as possible where they agree or convert to the idea, so that now we can facilitate them through the choice. And I just realized that if we put powerful visual models in front of people, instead of me versus you in a compete and retreat kind of conversation, if I talk through the model becomes the facilitator of a dialogue. It's like having a mediator in between. Now we're actually side by side working on this model, which is a very, very powerful process. The other thing that's in play here is that, when we think about how we communicate as leaders, we often use a lot of words only. And, when we use words only, we end up in this bottom right-hand quadrant where people say, well, I hear you, and it's all just noise. So if we can give people greater visual access to an idea, because only 11% of what we bring in from the world around us comes in through the auditory channel. 83% comes in through the optic nerve. 55% of the brain's reflex action is attached directly to the optic nerve. If we give people visual access, they say, oh, I see, and that's interesting. What I see is way more interesting than what I hear. The bit that I added when I started doing this work with models is the human brain's a sense-making machine. It wants to make sense of. And so if we give people structural access, in other words, we say there's structure to this. This is not just my intuitive genius, this is my organized genius. People say, oh, I get it. It's a structure, and therefore that's believable. So this model that I'm drawing for you now is just a model I made up. But because it's a model, people listen and go, well, that makes sense. What you're talking about makes sense. And if we get both of those things right, people go, I see, and I get it. Therefore, it's desirable. And then the bit we added to it was this super zone up here, this super green zone, where if you do both of those things to a very high level, and we call that choreography, in other words, how you walk through the model, desirable becomes buyable. And so I set out on helping people build the visual models that would take them to conversion really, really quickly, and land that in a way that allow them to live inside this top quadrant up here, and let people see and get the big ideas that they're actually sharing through what I now recognize is a system for thinking and influence, which is visual models. So we get to do some pretty fascinating stuff. And by the way, the drawing is deliberate. When you draw people in. It's an analog process, and humans are analog creatures living in a digital world. And that's why that's why people have so much discomfort. We are effectively living in a digital world on and off, but we're analog creatures living in a digital world, and we have all these gaps where things don't fit. So when you physically draw, you draw people in. And so we're really in the business of helping people think deeply through visual models and then communicate powerfully through those same models they've produced. I know I've kind of launched into something there and started drawing, but that might, that might help.
Yeah, no, this is who you are and what you do. And I encourage for all the people who are listening on sort of the audio only, you should go to the YouTube page and just watch, because this is one of Simon's geniuses. And if you go to his podcast, you can actually see him create live models for his guests on the spot, which gives you a little flavor of kind of what he's doing for these like corporations and entrepreneurs and business leaders around the world. It's so fascinating to me because I actually started my career in strategy consulting.
Mm.
And we would attempt to do projects involving, some elements, but not all of the elements. We try to get people to buy into values. We try to create decent visuals. We create these elaborate PowerPoints, but nobody on our team had your skill set, and we would have done a lot better at convincing the teams that we were working with to buy into these strategies had we had you on the team. So fascinating stuff.
Well, it emerged out of my own consulting career, right? Doing those same things: strategic planning, organizational change, sales enablement, et cetera, and I think it came naturally to me because my early childhood and my first professional career was heavily based on, you've got to be able to draw on paper the thing you're thinking about. And so I guess it just came naturally. But you're absolutely right. When you stand in front of a group of people and draw a framework of thinking, they can lean in much more easily than if you just put words against some dot points on a slide. It's a powerful way of communicating. And I've actually mapped Martin Luther King's speech to a visual model. Had he had that model,
Yeah,
people
that's
would have really
fascinating.
realized what the talk is about, because the talk is not about "I had a dream." When you really analyze that talk through the lens of a model, the talk is actually about the great American experiment called democracy is on the line. And, our founding fathers gave us these primary documents that give everyone the right to a level of dignity, et cetera. But it's on the line right now, and we all have to do better. That's actually what his talk is about. And when you map it against a model, it becomes really apparent that that's what his talk is about. Not one part of the society has to do better. We all have to do better. That's why it's such a powerful thing, right? But it's been, when we use language only, it's been reduced to "I have a dream," and people can only remember that bit about "I have a dream of all God's children playing on the rolling hills of Mississippi," and blah, 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 right? There's so much more in there that he actually spoke about, right? But I mapped it against a model just for the fun of the exercise, and it takes on a whole other light, because you can
That's
see what he's
fascinating.
talking about. Yeah.
We might have to get a copy of that to include in the distribution if you're willing to share it.
Sure. I will. Yeah.
And we should do another one. Maybe not right now, but I want to see a visual model for the Gettysburg Address.
I'll have to go and read it.
All right, so yeah, President Lincoln's my favorite president, and I think that's the most effective piece of communication ever
Wow.
written.
I need to go and have a look.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's in the same light actually as I Have a Dream speech. So
Right. Yeah.
if you
I'll,
get
I'll,
it
I'll,
done by
I'll,
the
I'll send you my modeled summary of "I Have a Dream." Yeah.
okay, awesome. I can't wait to see that. So as the audience can tell already, you're someone who thinks deeply about things. So that this skill that you've developed, this business, this really unique business, it sounds like a super fun business of going around and talking to corporations and senior leaders at some of the most powerful companies in the world and trying to get their teams to understand a little
Sure.
bit better, how they can be more successful in whatever they're doing. Um, is just part of what you're focused on. You have this whole online persona and thought leadership around business and
Mm.
wisdom and the relationship. So I want to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that you and I sort of resonate on, we discovered, is you believe in this idea that I believe in, which is that business can and therefore should be a force for good in the world.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, and where did that come from?
Oh, well, so much of my views of life come from growing up in the country, right? You can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. So, in Western Australia, there are bushfires all the time, and every year a farmer will lose their crop to fire. So everybody's a member of the volunteer fire brigade, right? And when there's a fire, everyone goes out and fights the fire. if you go into a shop and you don't have the cash on you at the time, the shop owner will say, come back and give it to me later. It's community values, right? The whole community functions on volunteerism and honesty and, connectedness. These are small towns, right? And if they don't, the town doesn't survive. It really is that simple. Like if we aren't kind to each other, it just doesn't work. And so my first exposure to businesses growing up were the pillars of community, the pillars of the community. The Rotarians were business owners. The elected councillors were, generally speaking, business owners. The sporting clubs were sponsored by businesses. The businesses were the pillars of community. The volunteer fire brigade was funded by the local businesses because businesses have the capacity to generate revenue. Salary earner doesn't. They have a fixed amount in exchange for their time, and that's it. And so when there's work to be done, good work to be done, it's generally going to come out of commerce somewhere. And so, I guess, and my parents were entrepreneurs, and I guess from a very early age, in fact, my father, first and foremost, was a senior town administrator, then became an entrepreneur. So he came from a serving the community career and then went into business, right? And so I guess that's all steeped over, my entire life. And businesses exist to convert resources to value. The best summary I can get of a business is its entire existence is to convert resources to value. Now, resources are people's time, money, equipment, technology, etc., converting those resources to value. And conversion, because I worked in electrics and electronics and then lectured at university for a while, I'm fairly well steeped in the sciences. Conversion of energy is one of the principal forms of one of the principal kind of considerations of science, right? There's no such thing as perpetual motion as far as we know right now. There's always a loss. There's always a loss of a certain amount of energy. You put heat in, you get an output out. There's always a loss. But it's all about the conversion of one form of energy to another. A business is just a conversion of resources as a form of energy. So people's time, the employees, people's efforts, people's thinking, money, equipment, technology into value that had better serve something. And if it doesn't serve something, then it has no meaning. Now, species only become extinct if they fail to remain relevant to the environment. So how is a business relevant to the environment? Do something that matters, right? So create a value that matters. Convert resources or energy into value that matters, right? And so what does that value need to serve? Well, it should serve profit because you need to be self-sustaining. It should serve purpose. What is the reason you exist? What is the thing you're trying to do? But it also should serve people because business still is fundamentally about people. If there was no people, there'd be no business anyway. And it should serve planet. And so, when you grow up in country towns, the first rule is do no harm. It's really kind of that simple. Farmers know, do no harm to the land because you need the crop next year and next year and next year, right? Do no harm. In a community that's up close and personal with a small number of people, do no harm because everybody knows you, But beyond that, if you're in business, are you a net consumer or a net contributor? So as a business, do you consume everything surrounds you or do you contribute? Now, purpose, people and planet, are you consuming the people in your business and your business ecosystem? Are you consuming your employees and spitting them out? Are you consuming your customers? Like, let's just churn and burn? Are you consuming the resources of the planet in an unsustainable way? And are you just hijacking the purpose that you say you serve? The word freedom is thrown. I know you're in, with real estate investment and creating wealth and everything else. The idea of financial freedom has been completely consumed and hijacked for marketing purposes. It's meaningless now. It once had purpose, but now it's meaningless. So are you consuming all of these things? And now let's talk about profit. Are you consuming profit for unproductive gain? So spending it on make as much profit as we can so we can buy a mega yacht. Is a mega yacht productive gain? Now, I could be talking inflammatory things here for some people, but profit has to exist, and people that take the risks should be rewarded. So the profit that a shareholder gets is payment for the risk, not payment for the investment. It's payment for the risk, because not everyone's a risk taker. So profit's okay, because people should be rewarded for the risk they invested, right? But are you over-consuming on profit? Are you over-consuming on people, over-consuming on planet, over-consuming on purpose? Or are you a net contributor? Do you contribute so powerfully to the purpose you set the business up to serve? Do you contribute to people along the way? Do you contribute to the planet along the way and do no harm? And do you contribute through profit in a way that actually serves multiple dimensions? And so there's a continuum. Once again, I can draw it easily enough. There is this continuum between consumption and contribution. Now, if you're right to the contribution end, we call that charity. And what goes missing is profit. So it's not self-sustaining. And so charities are always having to put the hand out to go, we need some donations and things like that. And so they're sourcing the money, if you like. At this end, the money is almost disconnected from the value. Like, we're not getting the money because of what we've done. We're getting the money to do what we do. And so someone else is going to have to give it to us. But if you go right to this end, it's not a charity. It's almost toxic in many respects. It's only because of the money. Once again, the money is disconnected from the value. So greater money, less value, less money, greater value. And neither of those is self-sustaining or useful. In the middle, what is a business for good? A business for good is the one that's found the right balance and place to play on here, whether it's just here or just here. But a business for good is one where people have made a conscious decision about here's how we can get the balance between consumption and contribution right across purpose, people, planet, and profit, and actually do no harm along the way. And it's hard to do. It's I had Sean Nelson from Lovesack on as a podcast guest, and he wants to design furniture for life. Well, how do you sell more stuff? If you make a couch that someone's never going to have to ever replace, because we all know about industrial redundancy, right? And
Planned obsolescence,
and everything, right? And he's going, I don't agree with that. I hate that. That's not good for the planet. So I want to design furniture for life. So we've got to be really clever, because we're a company. I want to make profit. Okay, so we're going to have to innovate. We're going to have to be really clever and innovate a whole lot more to introduce other things that solve problems for people, not just replace the old thing that we made to break after a certain period of time. And so it's finding that spot where you do really, really useful things. Another podcast guest I had, Sam Thevagayam, who has a company that remanufactures redundant parts for military equipment, right? They have a part of their process where there are aluminium offcuts or aluminium kind of waste from a machining process. So they sell all of that aluminium and put the money into a fund to pay for staff when unexpected things happen. Car breaks down, it's a huge bill. It's okay, we've got that covered. A medical cost you hadn't anticipated. They're turning manufacturing waste into a contribution to the people in the business, other than, the waste just goes out and we throw it out, or it's waste to us. We were willing to lose that aluminium. Why don't we take the money from that aluminium and pour it back into the people? So finding that business for good that first does no harm and tackles the really difficult challenge of how do we serve purpose, people, planet, and profit, and maintain this healthy, lean space in the middle between consumption and contribution. And then I frame all of that as a noble enterprise, an enterprise that has character, it has contribution, and it has courage, basically, to do some stuff others don't. Long answer to a short question, Nick.
No, I really like this line of thinking, and I like the frameworks that you're working from, because this is something I've thought a lot about. I've actually had podcast guests on here before talking about some aspects of this, because I feel like, at least here in America, I'm a little disconnected from big corporate life because I've been an
Yeah.
entrepreneur for basically my whole career. But pay attention. I have friends who work at a lot of these organizations, and I just get the feeling that there's a massive failure across that entire dimension of contribution versus consumption.
Mm.
And so much so, like, like, let's tease out an example. Like, take for example the social media companies that
Mm.
came about over the last couple decades. On paper, these are some of the best businesses ever invented.
Yeah.
Crazy gross margins, like 50% gross margins, producing, literally unmatched profits. Like, the profits that these organizations have produced is unbelievable. Cash cows. And now they own all kinds of stuff. But the question I have about it is have they captured all the costs? Or have they passed along a bunch of them to all of us in the form of negative externalities to society, to individual mental health, and other areas? And you know, are they really? They have added value, like, it's undeniable, right? Social media companies have added value because it allows people to connect. But what about all these costs? What is your take on that industry in particular?
Well, I think the first question is, can it pass the do no harm test? There's almost a series of questions you could ask, which, Rotary International tried to frame this in their 4-way test that every Rotarian around the world is meant to ask. Is it the truth? Is it fair? Is it beneficial to everyone involved? And will it build better friendships? It's pretty simple,
Yeah,
but unbelievably potent, right?
yeah,
But you could add to that, will it do no harm, to that? And is it beneficial? Is it going to bring great value, right? Is it based on truth? Is this whole social media platform, whatever the platform is, based on truth? Most of them can't pass that test, right? Is this going to build better friendships and relationships? Probably not. And is it beneficial to everyone involved? Probably not. And so, when we see an organization driven entirely by margin and profit, there's a structural issue with the public company dynamic, publicly listed company dynamic. And that structural issue is how the investment market is rewarded. So the investment market is rewarded on dividend, and the disbursement of dividend has everything to do with profit and unencumbered cash. So, the dividend comes out of the unencumbered cash. This is the money we have as a company that we have no requirement to spend because we're going to give it to the shareholders, right? And so, games are played. Sometimes there's not a dividend because the company wants to hold some of that cash for CapEx, for future investment, right? And so we're not going to, we're going to invest in this new project. We're going to buy this new company. And so, and we'll explain that to the shareholders, and your value is going to go up because we'll now own this new division. And so we're going to divert some of the cash that you would have got from profit, and we're going to divest that. Now our share price will go up. So our market cap will go up. Our valuation will go up because of that. And so you have an increase in asset value as well because of that. So all of the metrics are financial metrics on the investment side of things. And so share price might take a psychological calculation of this into account, but it takes no mechanical or structural calculation into account. And neither does dividend take a structural calculation into account of whether that company's been a good citizen or not. And have they contributed to planet, people, and purpose? It only takes into account the metric of whether it's contributed to profit and maybe positioning,
yeah,
through acquisition and stuff like that. And so we tend to rely on governments to regulate planet, people, and purpose. And so through environmental protection authorities and so on, and the reality is regulation is a toothless tiger in so many arenas, and is seen as an imposition. The greatest regulator in the world is the open market. The greatest regulatory mechanism in the world is the free market. And so, we're seeing the younger generation not buy from people or companies if they think they're doing harm. But if we think about the social media marketplaces, it's hitting at such a deep psychological level. I mean, we all know it's a highly manipulative business model. And so, the entire thrust seems to be stickiness. Get people onto your platform and get them to stay, bring them in for free and then get them to pay. And, the open market is the greatest regulator there is. And so does it pass muster on do no harm? Does it pass muster on is it beneficial to everybody? Does it pass muster? Is it going to build relationships and goodwill? So I think we sort of once you start to get to that, and it's a big machine, right? Challenging that and getting people to think about that requires some bold, courageous leaders. Who are we going to be? And, that is the reality. Can you run, a multi-billion-dollar company, maybe that sells furniture, and yet build furniture that lasts a lifetime? Well, we'll see. But they're gonna have a go, right? So it requires some bold leadership to do this. I think in the entrepreneurial world, Nick, it's a little easier because that entrepreneur can make a choice. Here's what we're going to create, and maybe the rise of entrepreneurialism is a great thing from this perspective. But if you go into business just to make money, at some point it's going to feel hollow. I mean, you yourself with your own story, and then I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurial business leaders who started the company to make money and then realized it was completely unfulfilling. They want to make money and love it, and it's a good thing. However, I want to have a greater impact. So it's complex, right? But I mean, social media is if we put 100 people in the room and said, is social media a good thing for the planet? I reckon the numbers in the negative would be in the 90s.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it would be maybe 100, maybe 100. Everyone knows. It's funny that this is not just true of social media executives. This is broadly true. We have these phenomenon out there in the corporate world. Entrepreneurship is different. I agree with you. I feel like entrepreneurship there is sort of like a bright light because the people who, not everyone, but the people who engage in it tend to come to the correct conclusions about business as a force for good. I feel like it's more likely than not. But in corporations, we have these crazy things going on, like CEOs and senior executives taking massive pay, right? Like you basically in America, if you become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and work for 5 or 6 years, you earn a generational fortune. You earn the fortune that in the old days you had to be an entrepreneur to earn, but you just earn that for making the top spot. And meanwhile, the average wages of these employees at companies are not going up by nearly enough to keep pace with the standard of living. So we have these this rot, at least that I see. But what's your take as someone who works with executives around the world? Are people aware that this is going on? Are they conscious of it? Do they want to make a difference in how these pay packages are put together? What's been your experience?
Yeah, let's talk about the structure of that dynamic first, right? So, if we have a publicly listed company, we have a board for governance, and that board for governance is responsible for dividend, valuation, and corporate social responsibility, which is managed by regulators, right? One of the reasons that entrepreneurs are often more connected, I think, is because they're closer to the firing line of creating value, right? They're right the greatest regulator in the world is the open market, and entrepreneurs are market facing in a way that the CEO of a publicly listed company might not be quite to the same extent. And so the board is responsible for, dividend and valuation. And so they hire a CEO to create that for them. And then the CEO hires a C-suite to help them do that. And then below that, and this work is a lot of thinking. And they're bright, intelligent people, right? But the dividend, at least, is a function of execution, because the profit comes from execution. The valuation, including acquisitions and things like that, could come partly from the thinking work, but the board of governance are attaching the value of the company as a publicly listed company to the efforts of the C-suite. So how do we make sure they do what we want them to do? Trap them with a big salary. We need to own them. And we need to own their thinking. In other words, if we say we want something, we can't have them pushing back unnecessarily. So how do we own that relationship? This is just a personal view I'm sharing, but we can own it through the money, right? And so that then says now I've got to make a choice on execution. Do I and that balance between consumption and contribution. So if profit is not up, should I cut something? Now it's interesting. Every CEO on the planet says our people are our greatest asset, but we count them on the expense side of the balance sheet. We don't hold them in an appreciating asset register. That's not how we count them financially, because we're using an industrial age finance system in a 21st century world, right? That is now AI driven and everything else. And we're still counting our people, who we call our greatest asset, on the expense side of the balance sheet. And so when things are looking shaky, let's cut some expenses and have mass layoffs or whatever. And there's clear evidence that when there's been mass layoffs, within years, the company has generally reinstated all those positions again, all those same numbers of people. But there was casualties along the way, as opposed to how do we, and look, the other question is, were the very best decisions made top down in terms of hiring and structure and systems and technologies that we bought? Like, were the decisions made at the most senior level impeccable? Can we say with certainty that every decision we made was impeccable, and therefore the fact that our valuations or our dividend are down must be at fault at the execution level of the organization? So the price will be paid at the execution level. Were our decisions impeccable? If our decisions were impeccable and our valuation, our dividends aren't where they need to be, then the fault must lie in execution, but we are the leaders of that. If our decisions were not impeccable, well, maybe we should leave, but that's not how boards work. So, CEOs and others are trapped inside this structure that's designed to, I think, just personally, keep them there and almost force an alignment through the kind of income that is earned. And then I've sat with so many CEOs over the years, and then one day I was talking to a CEO of about a $500 million market cap mining company. And, I get into really deep conversations with these people, often about family and marriages and things like that as well, right? It's hard to separate the two. And this CEO said, Simon, to be the CEO of a company of this size, you have to hurt the people you love. And I went, whoa, hang on, where did that come from? He said, sure. To be the CEO of a company this size, you are going to miss your kids' sporting events. You are going to miss their concerts at school. You will miss birthdays and anniversaries. You are going to hurt the people you love. You will lay off employees that you've known for 20 years. You are going to terminate the contract with a supplier that you've become a friend with. To lead a company at this size, you have to hurt people you love. And I thought, wow, that is such a big statement. So I said, when did you make the conscious and aware decision that you had the capability and the fortitude to be the CEO? Because this person had been a CMO prior to that, right? When did you make the conscious and aware decision you had the fortitude and capability to be the CEO? And he said, I never did. This was just the next step in the career path. Once you're in the C-suite, everyone's aiming for the CEO role. And our CEO left and the board said, would you be the CEO? And I went, yeah, sure. Then you find yourself in this position where to step backwards is a step down in your career. No one wants to do that. And so if you don't love this, you could step across to a smaller company and hope that that's okay. Or, you have some success. And if you don't think about it, you're looking to step up to the next company of the next size. And then at some point you find yourself in this position where you really have to hurt some people you love. And then sometimes you're asked to do some things you don't agree with. But there's this trap inside the structure of the markets, I think. Just a personal opinion, thinking it through. And so I may as well make generational wealth out of this, like I'm paying a big price for this. I'm hurting people I love. And then the other thing he said to me was, I'm just waiting for when they find out I don't really know what I'm doing. And that was such a telling statement. Like they think I'm 5 chapters ahead in the strategy book and I'm in the same chapter as everybody else. I just might be a few pages ahead. When are they going to find out I don't really know what I'm doing? And you've got to hurt people you love. And I didn't consciously decide I wanted to be here in the first place. So I may as well get huge reward out of this. How do we drive the salaries of the C-suite? Does that make some sense, Nick, in terms of unpacking the thinking?
Yeah, no, it does. And it just makes you think, I feel like I've been writing a lot about this in Profit Plus, my newsletter. There's so many points along the way of our capitalist system where individuals are tempted. It's so easy to compromise your integrity, for example. So easy. And our culture has given people sort of cover, right? So the fact that your friend said that to you is indicative of a broader issue. The fact that it's okay, like we've glorified money making to the extent where it's okay. Like, yeah, you got to be tough and miss your kids thing. And it's, like you almost glorify it because you need the culture has justified success by any measure. But I do think that there's been some sea changes or the beginnings of them. I'm hearing stories more and more on the podcast circuit of companies and people who, for example, businesses who really do actually prioritize their employees.
Yeah.
They treat them as assets. For example, they give them ownership stakes. They give them extra benefits, financial benefits, instead of, as you described, sort of the base playbook is to be, the base capitalist playbook is to essentially engage in labor arbitrage and try to make as much money as you can off the people that you employ. But people along the way have figured out that you don't actually have to do that. You can also lift people up if you structure your business right, and you probably will get better results. And so you're hearing entrepreneurs, you're hearing business leaders start thinking that way. And it gives me some encouragement that perhaps we're getting through this like peak era of selfishness. Like there's a new idea coming around.
Well, actually, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. I mean, we do play in this world of retention, employee retention, like hire and retain the best people. And we play around the edges of conditions of employment and things like that. If someone's working for a company and they know deep down they couldn't possibly feel better working anywhere else than they do here, they won't leave. Now, that doesn't come by trapping them with salary and conditions. It comes by fulfilling them and lifting them up. That means they've got to be a part of something that matters and feel like they are playing an important part in that thing that matters. So, we really got to be careful of the games we're playing. But I think the system is selfish, Nick. I don't think the people are selfish. And I want to qualify what I was saying about CEOs and C-suite. People want to vilify the CEOs of large public companies. I don't. They're not villains in this. They're victims in this. Just like employees, very often are the victims in this. They're in a system that is selfish, and the vast majority of CEOs that I have mixed with over 30 years now are very good people who care about things and care about people and want to drive a great company that's doing good things. There are clearly some that are not, right? But the vast majority are actually very good people who spend a lot of time thinking about stuff and who agonize over the tough decisions they might have to make, in the pursuit of profit. And in that respect, they're victims of a selfish system that is based on the one metric everybody understands, which is money. And it's the most measurable metric on the planet, which is why we keep defaulting to only using that metric, right? As opposed to, well, there are other metrics that matter. There's structural change required, which is why I have such great hope around the entrepreneurial world, because entrepreneurs can choose multiple metrics. They're the founder and owner. They can go, well, I am my own board, actually. And so what do I want this business to be? And how are we going to measure our contribution to purpose? Not just our contribution to profit, our contribution to people, and our contribution to planet. And how are we going to make sure, first and foremost, we do no harm? So, I think there's hope and possibility. But you use the word selfish. I think it's a great word, but I think it's the system that is selfish. And the challenge is testing the system, because systems don't like to be tested. Systems resist challenge, if you like, and they become a part of the habit pattern. And so, and humans don't step outside their habits very often and question them. And so, well, this is just the way it is, right? This is the way corporate structure works. But I do want to put a shout out there for the CEOs. The vast majority that I've worked with and met with are actually great people who agonize often over, well, what if I don't have all the answers? But who do I go to and talk to about this? Because I'm expected to know what to do. And what if I don't agree? And that's not good. And there is going to be harm. Should we be even doing that? There's a whole, but if we don't, well, we won't yield as much dividend to the shareholders, because we're going to pay for some stuff that shareholders perhaps don't even care about. The system is selfish. And I think we need this. There is a need for a sea change. And I think entrepreneurs, and I think particularly young entrepreneurs who do care about some of these things, might, challenge the structural nature of the system that has come out of the industrial age, but we no longer live in the industrial age. We're living in the 21st century. It's a different world. I'd like to see the current financial system that every company uses challenged. It's based on industrial age economics. Is it right for today's world, quite frankly? Is there another way we should be counting things? And if you don't really ask those deeper questions, you never test anything. But once again, if we put 100 people in the room and said, should businesses be the pillar of a community? Greater than 90% of them would say, well, they should. Are they? No, they're not. Oh, is that true? That, there's actually a lot of businesses that are the pillars of the community, but should business be the pillars of the community? Yeah. Is it okay for a business to do harm? More than 90% would say not at all. That is not okay. Should businesses look after people? The answer to that would be, well, yes, because without people, the reason for a business doesn't exist. At some level, every business serves people. That nature doesn't need us. Nature doesn't need businesses. The planet would do just fine without us. Plants would grow, animals would thrive. Business only exists to serve people somewhere. And so, should business serve people? I reckon greater than 90% would say yes. And do we need a greater level of nobility and thinking inside business? And I think the majority of people say, yeah, we do actually. It's time. So that tells us the need, and the challenge is the how. Because there's so much momentum built around a selfish system.
Yeah,
And this is not a conversation everybody wants to hear, but I think it's a conversation we should be willing to have, you know?
I agree. And so one of the things I really appreciate about your thought leadership is that, we live in this age where everyone's focused on hacks and tricks and tips and
Mm.
themes, and you're focused on wisdom. Wisdom is one of those words that like nobody really knows what it is, right? But what it is the willingness to have these tough conversations and to challenge yourself and to challenge the thinking in the room. And I feel like, this conversation we had about CEOs and in corporate America, and I think there's a hunger for those types of conversations at all levels of society, and certainly at the level of the C-suite. But there's this crazy pressure from the financial system and whatnot that, yeah, it needs to be adjusted. The same is true. Sadly, politically, the same is true.
Yeah.
The financial incentives of politics have created this madness where like you're just fundraising at all times and you don't really care about the interest of your constituents. You care about your fundraisers, your donors. And so it's literally the exact same problem that you see in corporate America, where the money is channeling the wrong kind of energy. But there's people out there like you and many others who see the need for a different conversation.
Yeah.
Makes me
Y- You know,
optimistic.
wisdom is about where does the motivation come from? That is not in dispute. Three levels of problem. The known problem, everyone knows it, everyone can talk about it. The hidden problem, everybody knows it, but no one wants to talk about it. And then the unknown problem, like what are we not even seeing? And wisdom is that ability for pause. You can't have wisdom without pause. And so the problem with tips, tricks, and hacks is that they are it's an attempt to create fast moving solutions that just fill the silence. And like, let's just do the next thing, next tip, trick, hack. Let's just fill the silence, right? And pause creates silence, and most people are uncomfortable with silence. But the only thing that differentiates us from on the planet is the space in between free will and action. And that space between free will and action is pause and it's silence. Okay, so here's something that happens. I've got the ability to make a choice about this. I want to stop and think in that gap, and now let's take some action. But what most people do is go, well, here's something that happened, learned response, go to action, right? And so wisdom lives in that space between free will and action. And you need to sit into silence on that and really kind of think around the corner and examine what are the hidden forces in play here, and what would the universal motivation be? What would the motivation be here that everybody would agree with? The hunt for the universal motivation is one of the big challenges. But if you find the universal motivation and build a company on that, it would be unstoppable. The universal motivation. And we tend not to think much lower than the hidden problem. So the known problem is activity. The hidden problem is kind of knowledge, but the unknown problem is wisdom. And really what we're looking for there is, what is the universal motivation? We go back to the social media companies. Are they built on universal motivation? Absolutely not. So, it's really, really challenging. And, you need to create that space, the gap in between, for the silence to occur, for people to think deeply and have deep dialogue. And actually it's got a commercial value. True market differentiation comes from depth of thinking. Like if you think deeply and you find your way back to a level of universal motivation for the very existence of your company and the genius you bring to the marketplace, people will want to come and work for you. Customers will want to buy from you. Suppliers will want to serve you. Banks will want to fund you. Regulators will want to license you. But you've got to think deeply through the silence. What's a universal motivation that makes the very existence of our company a powerful force for good? And, they're big dialogues and big thinking processes.
No, and I like that question because it reminds me like, look, the 20th century can be summarized as sort of human beings playing around with this idea, a terrible idea, that the universal motivation is like self-preservation, right? Like
Yeah.
they took Darwin's stuff and they thought like, oh, yeah, this must be true. And it led to like an absolutely disastrous 100 years in terms
Yeah.
of human conflict. And so we know that it's not that, and it's almost certainly kind of in the opposite direction. And the philosophers and the mystical thinkers have been attempting to describe it in various ways for all of history. And now we could do a whole episode on that someday.
Right.
We should plan that.
Yeah. We should actually, because there's universal motivation, um, survival. Is it the next level up, which is, the fittest and strongest prevail? Or is it the next level up that, the good for everything is served? It's much harder to get to that third level up than it is to play in the bottom two levels. And it's a zero-sum game to play for survival, because eventually the environment always wins. Eventually the environment always wins. So we better look after it. And I don't just mean the natural environment, the business environment, the societal environment. Eventually the environment always wins. And so survival is a zero-sum game eventually, because the environment is going to win. Survival of the fittest and strongest denies the fact that the greatest lottery anyone ever won was where and who they were born to. The lottery is who and where you were born, because as much as we'd like to claim self-made,
Yeah.
if you're born in a poverty-stricken community somewhere in the world and you never get an education, your ability to build a self-sustaining revenue stream is almost zero. And so the fittest and strongest might be a misnomer in some respects, at least in a commercial sense.
Yeah.
The higher level is, how do we make a greater contribution than self? I've been successful, but how do I now make a greater contribution than self? And what if I started with that? And is that the universal motivation to do something that is much greater than self and does no harm? If you design a business at that depth of thinking, I think it'd be pretty successful.
I know it would.
Yeah, but that's not
Yeah.
what business school teaches us.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. It's not even a part of the conversation, except for, in certain, you can find it. There is, there are people like you out there and thinking in along these lines and trying to be a messenger for these ideas and
Mm.
more and more, but it's certainly not mainstream yet, but it's yet, so
That's right.
we'll keep having these tough conversations and trying to encourage business leaders and entrepreneurs to think differently.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, look, Simon, this has been a really fun conversation. I'm going to make sure everyone knows where to find you and check out your incredible visual work, which we got a little taste of here, which was just really cool to see live. And I'm sure the audience will appreciate that. And thanks again for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I really enjoyed our conversation when you were on my podcast, and I've loved this conversation today. It is a dialogue we just have to keep putting in front of people, and challenge people. It's not where the business schools start, because they usually start with economics, but it's a conversation we just have to keep having. We really do. It's a humanity conversation. So
Yeah.
thank you for having me on. I've really
No,
enjoyed it.
my pleasure. I enjoyed getting to know you over the last month or so and look forward to
Yeah,
staying in touch. And we'll do this again, man. Thank you for being here.
my pleasure.